Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. A little advice about today's episode: go watch the short film Trevor before you listen. I've put a link in the show notes. Do it because it's a wonderful film. Do it because you'll better understand my conversation with Celeste Lecesne. Our topic today is the art and the power and the purpose of storytelling. As Celeste points out, there is a concerted effort underway to erase queer people's stories. They work to counter this suppression, and so in its small way does Transqat. In editing this episode, I was inspired to rewatch Neil Gaiman's commencement address to the University of the Arts in 2012.
Remember, whatever discipline you're in, whether you're a musician or a photographer, a fine artist or a cartoonist, a writer, a dancer, singer, a designer, whatever you do, you have one thing that's unique. You have the ability to make art. Sometimes life is hard. Things go wrong in life and in love and in business and in friendship and in health and in all the other ways that life can go wrong. And when things get tough, this is what you should do. Make good art.
Celeste Lecesne makes good art. But perhaps more importantly, they help queer youth tell their own stories. Hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, just give me another couple syllables now that I'm recording.
Love is in the air.
Oh. Speaking of in the air, just got back from a bike ride, oh man, is the tree pollen out of control. So if it looks like I'm crying, I'm blaming the tree pollen.
They're here to make us cry.
Exactly. Well, Celeste Lecesne, welcome to Transqat. I'm so delighted to be talking to you. I believe you are the first Transqat guest who is an Academy Award winner.
Oh, wow. I feel very honored.
So there you are. I want to.
Great to be here with you.
I want to start with something general, and then we'll get into lots of the specifics. But looking at your career, it seems to me to be evidence of something that is sort of a pet theory of mine. And it came out of, I used to be a Latin teacher, and when I read Pliny the Elder, he describes us humans as being just by nature incredibly vulnerable. You know, he says that nature gave some animals really good defensive structures. You get a shell, you get a thick pelt. Nature gave some animals offensive weapons. You get claws, you get sharp teeth, you get horns. And that we're born just incredibly vulnerable. And my take on that is that that's why we humans evolved into being the storytelling animal, that we tell stories to express identity, to express community. We use stories to try to make sense of a world that can be pretty cold and hostile at times. And so before we start getting into the specifics of your career, just in general, what is the power of storytelling to you?
Wow, that's such a big, deep way to enter this conversation. You know, I think that the thing that you didn't mention about story is that it's not worth anything unless there's a community of people to hear it. And I think it's one of the things that we are so brilliant at as human beings is telling stories as a way of creating protection for ourselves, right? And also offering protection to other people, giving warnings to people, passing along lessons. You know, I think for me, it's been an incredibly moving experience for me and humbling in a way to be able to see that a story that I told about myself, a story based on my life that I told that started out on stage. You know, I started performing it on stage, the story of Trevor, when I was, in the early 1990s. And it was only 10 minutes long. And then it got made eventually into a short film, which was 15 minutes long. But that tiny little story has moved out into the world and continues to do what I didn't have the intention of that happening, but it astounds me that a story can do as much as the story of Trevor has done.
You told a story that changed the world. And this isn't hyperbole. You changed the story that has led to what? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives saved?
We'll never know. 25 years of saving young lives. I mean, and that's an incredible thing that, I just think what stories can do are so surprising. And it doesn't always happen, right? It doesn't always happen that suddenly a story moves out into the world and does as much as Trevor does. And, I think one of the wonderful things wonderful and funny about it is that the Trevor Project, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, people never ask, who's Trevor? Because I think they're afraid to hear a very tragic story
Yes.
of a boy who realized he was gay and died by suicide. And when in fact, it's an incredibly triumphant story of a little queer boy from New Jersey who survived and lived long enough to be able to see the value and the importance of our individual stories in securing our human rights. Like the reason that the LGBTQ plus community has become what it is because we told our stories. We told our stories to our parents and our aunts and our uncles and our nephews and our nieces, and we came out. And it was our individual stories that have actually made the change in society. And I see this effort to silence and disappear us as a concerted effort to turn that back, right? And so one of the reasons I'm being very visible and very vocal, I've never really publicly acknowledged that Trevor was my personal story because I wanted everybody to see themselves in Trevor. But I feel that right now what's happening in the culture is that it's time for us to say, this is my story.
Right.
And especially for the young people.
I don't know if you happen to catch the news in the last couple of days, but this trans legislator in Montana who is quite literally being silenced for speaking her opinions. So that desire for erasure, that desire to shut us up and stop us from telling our stories, it's very real.
And that's not just for, it's not just for trans and queer folk, it's really like, the Justins, no Justins, no Justin, no peace in Tennessee. Like what those two young men did is just incredible. And it really requires the actions of, a Justin Pearson and a Justin Smith and a Zoe Zephyr to counter the sort of amorphous and generic hatred that we don't know any of those lawmakers' names, right? What we know are the names of the people who actually stood up and said, this is my story. This is what I believe. This is what this country is all about.
Well, let's get into Trevor. You said it was a stage production first. What brought you to writing it?
Very early on, I realized, I started out, when I was 15, wanting to be in the theater and wanting to be an actor. But this was, back in the 1970s and 80s. And I pretty quickly realized that I was being the little, queer, light in the loafers entertainer that I am, that it was very limited for a person like me who was clearly gay and clearly was not going to shut up about it. And I think that I realized that my options were limited. I was never going to be the boyfriend or the father or the businessman or the villain, in that way. And I just thought I had to make some opportunities for myself. So I had to force myself to become a writer in order to create work. And I thought, well, I'll just play all these different characters and people will realize how talented I am and they'll definitely give me jobs. And what started out as a kind of, I guess it was just my survival technique, turned out to be my career. Yeah. And I've done many solo shows and including Word of Mouth, which was the show that Trevor was a part of, and which opened off Broadway in 1994. And, you know, what's interesting is that there were other characters in that play, but it was the story of Trevor that really caught people. And it was at the time, right? It was just at the time when the culture was beginning to change. We were just beginning to understand the fact that young people knew who they were. I mean, it's incredible to me to look at the young people that I work with now, and see how deeply they know themselves, and to think back 25 years ago, before Trevor, it was taboo to talk about young people knowing their sexuality. As a gay man growing up in New York City, to step out onto a stage and play a 13-year-old boy who knows he's gay felt like the most transgressive thing that I could do. I literally, when I first started performing the show, every night I would go out, and during that section of the show, and I'd go out and I think, oh my God, someone's going to shoot me. Like, I really felt that way. That's how internalized the fear was to talk about young people knowing who they are. And now, of course, those of us in the queer community certainly know that young people know who they are from the age of 4, right? They have a sense of who they are. They may not be able to use the language, but they know.
Yeah. I was just saying to somebody recently that I knew who I was before I hit double digits, but I knew in the sense that there was no vocabulary for what was going on inside me. And it's not a matter of, you know, I haven't sorted through the data yet and figured out, okay, here's where I belong. It was not part of any conversation at any level that was going on. And so, of course, I felt isolated and alienated. So there's a sense of knowing, but if you can't put words to it, if you can't tell your story. You know.
And we need a story to, you know, in order to belong, right? Like we're, you know, I think that a lot of the times like this, a lot of the rhetoric around drag performances, right, that's going on is that they don't want young people to see drag performers because they feel that they'll get an idea. Like, and I'm thinking there are worse ideas than becoming like they're really terrible ideas out there. But the fact is that it's not like you get ideas. It's that there's an idea out there that you finally go, oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
Yes.
You know, when I was 15 and started working in the theater, you know, I just was like, oh, my people, these are my people. And it's just, that was a story that I could actually relate to. And it took away the terror of not belonging in the world.
Which is just all encompassing when you're feeling that way. There are a lot of really powerful lines in Trevor, and also a couple of really nice Easter eggs for queer people. There's a scene where Trevor's watching Fame. In high school, I worked in a movie theater, and I over and over again would watch that scene. And there is, of course, one character who sort of comes to terms with who he is at a Rocky Horror Picture Show showing, and that very much resonated with me. My first Rocky Horror experience really confirmed that, yeah, okay, there's something queer going on here. Some of the lines that he's afraid that he's going to be a person with no future, that a fairy, a weak person doesn't deserve to live. And then at the pivotal moment, he says, it would have been a skillion times worse if I had lived. And all of these things so obviously are filled with lived experience. That sort of exposure that only comes from having been through something that awful. They just resonate, Celeste.
Thank you. You know, I think for me, the thing that one of the things I love about it is that it's so funny.
Yes.
Like, for instance, when there's a scene in which Trevor is taken out to get ice cream by the local priest who's going to explain the facts of life to him. And, you know, that scene was not in the original stage play. We needed like an extra few minutes on the piece because it was only 10 minutes long and it needed to be like 20. And I added it at the last minute, and that experience was as close to verbatim as I could recall.
Seriously.
Yeah, it actually happened to me. And it was truly the most humiliating experience of my young life, because I really was blindsided by my parents setting me up at the local booth and having him take me to the Dairy Queen and tell me the facts of life, and ask me, if I was interested in boys, which, as a 13-year-old, you're just like, no, what?
Why? Why would you say that?
Just because I have because I'm mad about my best friend, but it was so humiliating. And one of my favorite moments is when the car pulls away and Father Joe is going, and Trevor says, "I've decided to start a new life. I'm going to dye my hair and eyelashes." And I just think it's such a gay thing to think. So there are little moments like that relieve the sadness of it and but add to the poignancy of it, right? And I have to say that seeing that scene huge on a movie screen with hundreds of people in the movie theater was just one of the greatest moments of my life as a writer, when you get to retell the story and everybody's laughing in the audience, and the moment of my deepest humiliation and shame is suddenly a celebration, because I see that everybody has had some version of that experience and they can relate.
Yeah, it's like an enormous hug of, you're not alone. We understand that completely. Now that I'm glad you brought that scene up, because the one actor whom I knew ahead of time for Father Joe, Stephen Tobolowsky is in the car, and this is maybe a year or two after his Groundhog Day performance, and oh my God, this scene is just peak Tobolowsky. He holds that scene so well, with, as you were describing, those two emotions that are going on at the same time there. On the one hand, the two of them are hysterical, but on the other, there's something that the stakes for Trevor are very high. That we will let the steam off. We will give you some release with laughter here and there, but we know that the stakes for Trevor are life and death. And
just a genius in that scene. I mean, that was such an incredible good fortune that we were able to get him at that moment.
So the film comes out, it's shown, it's very well received. You are nominated for an Oscar for writing it. What was that whole awards season like?
Well, I think I learned a very important lesson during that period, which was, I said to my best friend at the time, she said, "How are you doing with the whole thing?" And I said, "Well, I really don't want to think about it too much. I don't want to get my hopes up." And she said, "What do you mean you don't want to get your hopes up? Like, are we going to pretend that you're not going to be disappointed somehow if you don't win? Like, if you don't get your hopes up, you're going to be just as disappointed if you get your hopes up or if you don't. So why not," she said, "use the next couple of months to really experience what it's like to win. And if you don't win, then you'll at least have had the experience of like what it feels like to win. And if you win, then you'll be prepared." And that seemed to me like the most incredible advice I've ever gotten in my life. It turned out that the film it did win. It was nominated, and it was the film that won. It wasn't me as the screenwriter. It was the film that actually in that category that it gets nominated and wins.
Okay.
At the time, I was doing my show in New York off Broadway, and the idea of flying all the way to LA, it was too crazy, because I was doing, in fact, 2 solo shows at the same time during that So it was quite a challenge. And I just decided that I would watch it on TV. And the director and the producer received the award, and they mentioned my name, and it was a thrill. It was a thrill of a lifetime. But I think in perspective, what happened afterwards was truly the great miracle.
Yeah.
That was really the great miracle, which was when HBO agreed to put it on television. We were able to get Ellen DeGeneres to do a wraparound presentation. And this was just after she had come out in 1998. So she was super famous and everybody was going to watch it. And me and the director and the producer, we started to put it together. We found out there was no suicide prevention lifeline specifically for gay and lesbian teenagers. So we quickly became a nonprofit, found a lifeline to be able to work with, train them. And that first night when Trevor appeared on HBO, there were over 1,500 telephone calls. Not all of them from young people in crisis, not all of them from young people who were who identified as queer, but all of them felt something. They felt something about Trevor moved them, and they wanted to reach out. So we quickly realized the importance of the Trevor Lifeline, and that is something. I mean, the Academy Award helped make that happen,
Right.
and that is truly, for me, the real miracle.
I can't imagine there are people who aren't aware of the Trevor Project, but talk a little bit about that, just where it's been. You said we're coming up on the 25th anniversary.
This year is the 25th anniversary of, and it started out as just a phone line. It was a voice to voice, life to life connection. And then sometime, in the 2000s, they added Trevor Chat and Trevor Text and Trevor Space, which is like a kind of Facebook for LGBTQ plus young people. And, it's now serving Mexico as well. And I think the idea is very slowly they're beginning to make it more international. It'll be really one of those things that where they have to do it very slowly and be culturally competent in each one of those countries.
Right.
And Mexico happened a couple of years ago. So last year it happened. And so it's really there for generations of young people to be a safety net, to a place where they can turn and have the kind of life-to-life connection, just to be able to begin the arduous process that we all have to go through to tell our own story. They begin, I always think of it as it's them taking their first step in becoming the protagonist of their own story.
Right.
That to understand, I have a story. And if you can't really tell it to somebody, a story isn't any good. But if you can tell it to somebody, it can keep you connected to the world and to yourself. So I see that the connection between my telling my story, which gave young people the opportunity to begin to tell their story, which then changes the story out into the world of what it means to be a person who belongs to the LGBTQ plus community.
And that's what I meant before when I said without hyperbole, your story, this adorable 13-year-old boy, your story has changed the world. And I am just in awe of that.
Me too, by the way. I'm in awe of it too.
How involved, I know you are with a couple other projects we're going to talk about, Future Perfect, but how involved are you with the Trevor Project?
I'm a big supporter of the Trevor Project, and I always will be. And I was for a time a Lifeline counselor. I was for 15 years on the board. And then I just felt that they were doing really well, and I was curious to do something else. And I also, around that time, began to notice that there was something markedly different about young people who were LGBTQ, and I was blown away. Yeah. In 2016, I was traveling around the country, and I was going into schools, as I always do when I perform. I find my way into high schools and LGBT centers. And I always get into the schools with the idea that people think I'm going to talk to the young people about Trevor. And in fact, I like to flip the script and have them talk to me about what it's like to be their own 21st century version of Trevor, right? Like,
Right.
What's that like? And I began to notice in 2016 that there was something really different. This generation of young people had a social justice component that I had never seen in people so young. They were incredibly connected to themselves emotionally, to each other as well. They were the first generation of queer young people who had a sense of their own history, that people had come before them, and that there were people coming up behind them, their younger brothers and sisters and their younger cousins. This to me was so markedly different that I wanted to see if it was happening everywhere, not just in the sort of bluer states and that I was traveling to with my performances. So I called up a friend of mine, Ryan Amador, and he's much younger than I am. And I said, let's travel and go to places that we've never been and find out if this is happening everywhere. And so we went on the road and started offering these workshops, storytelling and songwriting workshops, to LGBTQ plus young people in schools and LGBT centers, and going to Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Iowa, all the middle states and the southern states, and really trying to find out if this was a thing. And in fact, it was. And we started getting them to create art. We felt that, we really believe that the self-expression of LGBTQ plus youth is a declaration of a better future for everybody. Where they're doing well, where they're safe, seen, and celebrated, everybody does better. Where they're not doing that well, it's not safe for anybody, really.
Right.
We really feel like they're on the front lines of the future, of what it looks like to determine your own life, to decide, this is who I'm going to be, as opposed to following the rules that somebody tells you this is who you ought to be.
We'll tell you what's possible.
Yeah. And they'll always tell you that nothing is possible. Or, you get, one from column A, one from column B, and that's it. And we like more than two columns.
Yes, please.
Right before the pandemic, we were in Louisville, Kentucky, and we went to a middle school, GSA, that invited us to come. And the young people were remarkably clear about who they were, and remarkably queer in who they were. And we asked them, well, how can you be so sure? And this sixth grader, without missing a beat, said, your heart tells you and you obey. And I think to myself, with all of this noise that's going on out there, this is what they're afraid of. They are afraid that people will listen to their own bodies and their own hearts, and they will come to their own conclusions about who they are. And rather than finding the care and the guidance and the safe environment in which those young people can find the correct information and the best information for them and for the family, they're actually trying to remove those things and putting those young people at risk. They're doing the exact opposite of what they claim they're doing, and really putting us all at risk, really, because these young people, to me, are such an example of what it looks like to be yourself, right? They are, as I like to say, living lives of quiet determination.
Now, you have been so impressed by what you learned on this trip with Ryan that you have made some personal changes for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's more than the trip. It's really the young people that I met. I think for me, when I was 15 and 16, really the gay was the choice, right? Like it was as close as I could understand to like who I was. But I think that if I were 15, 16, 17 years old now, I'd certainly be non-binary. And during the pandemic, we moved all of our workshops online. So we were meeting with young people 3 and 4 times a week online, young people from all over the country, offering them workshops, art creative workshops, doing like a podcast program, making albums with them in their homes. And also, just exploring what it means to be themselves, giving them a safe space that they could go to and do some writing. And in the course of it, I just became so enamored of their clarity. And I started to go, oh my gosh, that's what I am. And really, with their encouragement, I just, I came out as non-binary, changed my pronouns to he, they, just because. So my friends who have been calling me he for all my life don't get too confused. and yet inside myself, I identify as they, as non-binary. And I changed my name. I took my middle name, which is Celeste, which was sort of hiding inside my name for all those years.
Wow.
Sort of terrified to be seen when I was young, terrified I'd be recognized for the slightly queer person that I am. And it's so liberating to take that name. And now it's really like appropriating the word queer, like reappropriating the word queer, right? Like I'm repurposing the name Celeste in a way and celebrating that part of myself.
Well, congratulations. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. You must know that experience yourself.
Oh, very much. All of the worrying and the running through meticulously all the sort of planning. Okay, what happens if this happens? What happens if this? The moment I came out, the moment I decided, okay, I'm done with this. I'm just going to be myself. It opened up whole new vistas. The metaphor that I used with my therapist at the time was that I had just lived in the dark for as long as I could remember, and there was no path forward. And the moment I made this decision to come out and to transition, it was like I could see a quarter of a mile down the road.
Oh yeah.
And as I've been living as myself, that distance has just increased exponentially until, wow, there's a road here. I'm not stuck in the dark.
Yeah.
And it was such a burden of worry and shame and guilt that all of a sudden wasn't relevant anymore.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean that we don't have to continue finding ourselves, right? Like it's not like you reach a place that's where it's like it just means you understand what the fight is. There's a beautiful quote by E.E. Cummings. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's to be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you into everybody else, means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight, and to never stop fighting.
Yeah. It is ongoing. I came out at the age of 55, and you can't undo half a century of damage that closeting did. But the ability to face that, the ability to live life more fully, it just becomes not only easier, but more desirable.
And also you want other people to experience it. So you want to fight on behalf of other people, or at least that's the direction I took, which is the joy of being oneself is unparalleled in the human experience, in my own experience.
Yeah.
And everybody to feel that freedom. That is true freedom, to really be yourself, to know who you are and to be that person. That's really the most precious gift that you can give yourself. And then you want to fight to have other people give themselves that gift as well.
Giving the next generation of queer folks a voice is what's behind Future Perfect.
Yeah. The name of it is called the Future Perfect Project. And we travel around. We're a national arts initiative. We travel around the country, actually giving young people the space and the encouragement to find their creative voice And through music, through creative writing, through media projects, we are in the business really of amplifying their voices at a time when people are really trying to silence and disappear them. We feel like they have so much to say and so much to teach us. Like, we're not out there teaching them. We're giving them the opportunity to be able to speak their truth. And because so many people are speaking on their behalf and so many people are speaking, about them, we just felt like we just have to do what we can to give them the opportunity to have their own say about who they are as a generation, as individuals. Because, like I said, bringing us back to the very beginning of this conversation, it's in these individual stories that our culture, our world, it changes.
Their individual world, the people they can touch and in their circle, and then it just radiates outward.
You know the power of telling your own story, right?
Yes.
And so give that to a young person, to begin to give that gift to a young person, to be able to, just at the moment they're beginning to understand who they are and who they are in relation to the world. It's so much fun.
So how does the group work in terms of organizations reach out to you and bring you in for workshops, or is this something that's going on online all, constantly?
Oh, we do. We're a hybrid organization. We go to schools for a period of a week, and we work on a project, getting them to actually speak their truth, and in whatever way is appropriate for that organization or that school. We do application-based programs online, making albums, podcasts, animations. We do a bi-monthly writer's room where we come and young people just follow, we give them some prompts and with writing, people share their writing. It's just a way of keeping the wheels of storytelling oiled and running. It also gives young people an opportunity to meet each other from around the country and kind of be in each other's presence in a safe environment where they can be themselves. Yeah, and it's all online. All the information's online at thefutureperfectproject.org. The website has all of our media projects on it, and it's really their voice.
Yeah.
We just help amplify it and broadcast it.
I'm assuming that the feedback from the kids is overwhelming and positive in terms of having that opportunity, because as a former public school teacher, the opportunities to have your voice heard in that environment can be pretty restrictive.
Yeah, we recently have been working with this one school where their track record on LGBT issues is not very good, and the GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, or the Gender and Sexuality Alliance in the school, they're busy complaining to each other. And so we were like, well, how about you write what you feel and what your experience is? And we're connecting them to a local radio station so they can go on the radio station and actually deliver their monologues and, speak about what's happening at this school and hopefully affect changes, because nothing is getting changed within the school itself, right?
Yeah.
So we're just seeing what we can do about being the agency that can move them out to a wider community and make people understand what's going on the inside.
Enabling them to not only find their own voice, but helping them to get it out there, to disseminate it.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that, as I said, impressed me the most was their incredible desire to make the world a better place, more inclusive, more diversity. They're insistent on it. And that not only includes them, right, and their friends, it also means like everybody. They just want things to be fair. They have a remarkable desire and ability to be able to assess fairness. And their intolerance of injustice is just really, it's inspiring to me.
They seem to, and of course we're generalizing, but they seem to have a sense of the fact that it's not a level playing field for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that unless there is systemic change, everything else is kind of just lip service. That until you level that playing field for everybody, some of us are always going to be marginalized.
Yes, and I think that they clearly understand, especially in the past year, that if things do not change, they will not be allowed to be themselves, and that's just not acceptable. That's just not acceptable. They've grown up. Many of them have grown up with the freedom and the right to be themselves, and I don't think they're going to be so happy about putting that back in some sort of little box.
No, I don't think so. I'm going to hold up an object, and since this is a podcast, I'm going to have to ask you to describe it. Can you see that?
Oh, look, it's a program
It
from
is.
my solo play that I did at Hartford Stage called The Absolute Brightness of Leonard Pelkey.
Now, I wanted to talk to you a bit about this, but mostly I just wanted to ask if you remember me. I was in section D, row 8. I had
right.
the black skirt and like a burgundy top.
Oh, sure, of course.
Absolute Brightness was a one-person show where you inhabit how many characters?
9, something like that.
All as a different way to tell a story. And as I was thinking about this, I realized that Trevor is a very linear arc, right? We have his point of view. We don't really get involved with why his parents respond to him the way they do, or what was going on in Father Joe's head as he put that conversation together. But this is a similar story, but from a fragmented perspective. And we get the story from all of these different characters, all of whom are played by you. So tell me about Absolute Brightness.
You know, I wrote a book, for a young adult novel, and that came out in, I think it was 2007. And it's a story about a town and a young boy who is, very flamboyant and fun and interesting. And he comes to a town, and he goes missing. And then the book is about what happened to him and the people in the town trying to figure out where he went. And the book was wonderful. It was very well received, and then I thought, with everything that was happening in around 2014, 15, I wanted to tell a story for adults and to say, like, what's our part in it? What's our part in keeping these young people safe? And what happens when we don't do that? So I told a story from the point of view of all the people in the town and how this young person affects them and how in some ways they let him down. And yet what's at the very center of the story is a missing person who, what I hoped to do in the play was to make you feel the presence of that missing person. Yeah. So it's a very astute observation. It's sort of like the negative of the positive, right? It's by not seeing Leonard Pelkey, you actually feel him so deeply, right, through the lives of these other people.
Paying attention to and feeling the absence of a queer kid is something that anyone who deals with kids needs to understand, that when a culture bullies you into erasure or into diminishment, that's going to create an absence in your community. You're losing something.
And I think that one of the things that's not often talked about is what an asset young people are, and especially what an asset queer young people are in their determination to be themselves. They're modeling for us the courage that it takes and also the joy. There's a lot of talk about the challenges and the obstacles that they face and some of the really harmful effects of the culture on young queer bodies. But people don't talk that much about what I see so plainly, which is the joy of being yourself. As I said, we're working on a podcast. It's called I'm Feeling Queer Today. And unanimously, the 10 young people who were putting together the podcast decided that the first pilot episode was going to be about queer joy, because they were really tired of all these narratives about themselves as being at risk and suicidal and, depressed. And that they said there are reasons that are so wonderful about so many wonderful things about our life. And we want to celebrate those things for a moment, right?
I recently did some photographic work with a friend, a guy I had interviewed on the podcast a while back, and his work is designed around showcasing just exactly those two things, the trans joy and the trans struggle. That it's not one or the other. And that's why I love the title of the podcast, because there are days you wake up and I'm feeling queer today.
And we need to be reminded of it. And we need to remind other people of it and say, like, we're here, we're queer, and we're valuable to you in the community. We're doing something.
Celeste, thank you so much for this. Please keep telling the stories. I look forward to what you do next.
Thank you so much for this beautiful time together. I just love talking to you, and I love how deeply invested you are in our community, and how you're being yourself has made your local community just shine. You are the absolute brightness in that community, I can tell.
My friend Tyler wants me to get better at accepting and acknowledging compliments. So Celeste, thank you for those kind and generous words. I'm a grammar nerd. I was that kid in elementary school who loved diagramming sentences and who was bitterly disappointed when she learned that you can't make a living from that. For those of you who aren't, just bear with me for a second. Verbs have a quality called tense. It describes when the verb is happening: present tense, past, future. Future perfect describes an action that by some point in the future will have been done. And that's how you translate it. Will have whatever. That's the beauty of the Future Perfect Project's name. See, I didn't have an archive of information, either factual or coded into fiction, to find out where I belonged and indeed whether I belonged. Celeste is working with queer youth to build that archive that we needed back then. And so by some point in the not too distant future, the archive will have been established. That life-affirming, life-saving resource of stories built on lived experience will have saved lives. Next up is a bonus episode of Transqat, which will arrive on Friday, May 26th. Please join me for a conversation with New York Times bestselling author Kristen Higgins. We'll talk about her latest projects, about inclusion and diversity in fiction, and about the challenge of cis-het people writing queer characters. We might also address the mystery of the missing snacks. I'm Claire McCarthy. This has been Transqat. Thank you so much for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. Just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtransqat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.